Okay, so when you picture the British countryside, what's the first word that pops into your head? Probably something like natural, right? You know, the rolling hills, the ancient woods. But what if I told you that almost none of it is natural at all? In this explainer, we're going to dive into the pretty amazing story of how Britain's wilderness was actually built by us.
Now, this quote comes straight from our source material, and it just feels wrong, doesn't it? No natural habitat. I mean, come on. But you got to stick with me here, because this one idea, well, it's the key to understanding the entire British landscape.
So that's the big question, isn't it? What does natural even mean in a place like Britain? We're about to peel back all these layers of history to see how this green and pleasant land was really made, not born, and why that difference matters now more than ever.
All right, let's just jump right in with a pretty bold claim. Human hands have so deeply shaped this land that pretty much nothing has been left untouched.
I mean, just let that sink in for a second. Not one single square inch. Even a place that feels as ancient and wild as an Iron Age fort, it's not really wild. It's basically a 2,000-year-old human construction site, and all the plants and animals you see there today are a direct result of what people did all those centuries ago.
So how did we get here? Well, it's a long story of constant change. It all started way back with Neolithic farmers who began clearing the ancient wildwood. Then came the Enclosure Acts, which gave us that familiar patchwork of fields and hedgerows we see everywhere. That was turbocharged by the Agricultural Revolution, then dramatically reshaped by the Dig for Victory campaign in World War II. And finally, a lot of it got paved over during the massive building boom after the war. Every single step was a human act.
And it wasn't just the land we changed, it was the animals too. A lot of the wildlife we think of as quintessentially British are actually, well, uninvited guests. The Romans and the Normans brought over deer and rabbits for food. And then much later, the Victorians brought in things like gray squirrels and canted geese just because they looked nice, with no idea of the ecological mess they were about to create.
Okay, so if the whole landscape is basically a human creation, why does it need so much constant work to keep it that way? To get that, we need to understand this incredibly powerful natural force that is always trying to take back control.
And that force is called succession. Really, you can just think of it as nature's default setting. If you leave any patch of cleared ground to its own devices, it doesn't just stay that way. It immediately starts this slow, steady, predictable march back to a much wilder state.
And that journey back is surprisingly consistent. First, you get pioneer grasses and wildflowers moving in on the bare ground. Then, tougher shrubs and scrubs start to take over. And then finally, tree seedlings get a foothold, and the land is well on its way to becoming woodland, which is the natural climax habitat for most of Britain.
Right. So if succession is always trying to turn Britain back into a forest, why isn't it covered in trees? The answer is one word: intervention. Now, this is any action that stops or reverses succession. And yeah, a big storm or a wildfire can do it, but here in Britain, that force is overwhelmingly us, with our grazing animals and our lawnmowers constantly fighting back the forest to keep the open landscapes we love.
And underneath all of this, beneath every single food chain, is the literal foundation of almost all life on land. A buzzard eats a rabbit, the rabbit ate grass, the grass grew in soil. A warbler eats a spider, the spider ate a fly that fed on a flower that grew in soil. We eat beef from a cow, the cow ate grass that grew in soil. You see the threat, right? It's all about the soil. Without it, everything just collapses.
So what even is soil? It is so much more than just dirt. It's a living, breathing, complex ecosystem. It's a mix of ground-up rock, decaying stuff called humus, water, air, and it's absolutely packed with its own fragile world of bacteria, fungi, worms, and insects. It's alive.
And what a soil is like all comes down to the size of its rock particles. And the difference in scale here is just mind-boggling. Get this. A single grain of coarse sand can be 1,000 times bigger than one particle of clay. 1,000 times. And that one physical difference dictates everything else: how it holds water, air, nutrients, and ultimately, what can actually grow in it.
So you've got this constant pressure from humans on one side and from nature on the other. How on earth do we protect the valuable habitats that are left? Well, that's where conservation comes in.
The absolute bedrock of habitat protection in England is something called a Site of Special Scientific Interest, or an SSII for short. So you'd think these crucial sites cover a big chunk of the country, right? Well, the answer is just 8%. That's it. A tiny, fragile piece of the whole puzzle.
And sure, on top of those SSSIs, you've got other layers of protection. The cream of the crop national nature reserves, local reserves for communities, even big international labels. But here's the catch. Putting a label on a map isn't some kind of magic force field. Every single one of these places still needs constant, active, hands-on management just to survive.
You know, creating nature reserves after World War II was absolutely essential. We were losing habitats at an alarming rate. But this brings up a really fascinating and kind of counterintuitive question. Did that solution accidentally end up creating a whole new kind of problem?
And it really is a double-edged sword. On the one hand, yes, the reserves were a massive success. They saved countless species and precious habitats from just blinking out of existence. But the problem? They created these isolated islands of nature, sitting in a huge sea of farmland and cities. This fragments wildlife, makes them vulnerable, and it creates this dangerous idea that nature is something that only belongs over there in the reserve and that the job is done.
So this problem, this isolation problem, is really the key challenge we're facing today. So in this last part, let's look at a way forward, how we can maybe start to connect the pieces and build a genuinely wilder future.
And this is the fundamental dilemma we're stuck in. We all need affordable food, which requires super efficient mechanized farming. But that very same efficiency often relies on practices that harm the ecosystems, especially the pollinators, like bees, that our entire food supply depends on. We're kind of caught in this loop where the way we grow our food could end up undermining our ability to grow it at all.
So how do we break out of that cycle? Well, one really powerful idea is the concept of biodiversity networks. The goal is simple. Connect all those isolated islands of nature we were talking about. We need to create pathways for wildlife to move and mix, with little refueling stations along the way for them to rest and feed. It's basically a transport network for nature.
And honestly, the best part is how simple the building blocks are. The islands are the nature reserves and parks we already have. The pathways can be the thousands of miles of hedgerows and even roadside verges. And the refueling points, they can be village ponds, churchyards, and this is the big one, our own gardens.
And this, right here, is the hidden superpower. When you add them all up, private gardens cover a massive area of Britain. It is a huge, untapped potential just sitting there, a chance for millions of us to help weave together these crucial pathways into one big connected national network for nature.
And that really leaves us with a final and, I think, pretty empowering thought. We've gone from a landscape totally shaped by people to one that's been broken up into tiny islands. And maybe the future now depends on us, the same people, reconnecting all those pieces. It really makes you wonder, what role could your own patch of land, no matter how small it is, play in building that connected, wilder future?